Welcome back to Theology Today for the conclusion of our three-part series on the New School PCUSA of 1838. In our previous episode, we witnessed the ultimate breakdown of the denomination, the sweeping expulsion of 50,000 members, the dramatic walkout of 1838, and the bitter legal warfare that left the New School faction structurally disinherited. But history does not stand still, as both the old and new school assemblies struggled to establish their separate identities. They found themselves swept up in the tectonic shifts of mid-19th century America. Today, we examine the final act of this decades-long drama. We will explore the crisis of slavery, mapping the exact process through which the moral question of chattel slavery created regional alliances and forced painful new divisions in both schools. We will look at the institutional resurrection, tracking the remarkable separate growth of both factions as they built competing networks of colleges, seminaries, and global missions. Finally, we will trace the path to reunion, uncovering the profound manner in which the fires of the American Civil War dissolved old animosities, paving the way for a historic reconciliation in 1870. Let's dive into the final chapter of A House Divided and ultimately reunited. While the initial fracture of 1837 to 1838 was catalyzed by theological and procedural disputes, the decades that followed saw the division deepen under the weight of America's most intractable cultural crisis. This massive, deeply rooted, and highly contentious cultural crisis that structurally threatened the entire fabric of mid-19th century American society was none other than the institution of chattel slavery itself. New School Presbyterians, generally characterized by theological flexibility and a passion for societal reform, increasingly aligned themselves with the rising tide of Northern anti-slavery sentiment and outright abolitionism. Grounded in the activist spirit of the Second Great Awakening, this reform-oriented mindset made the New School a natural home for those who viewed the total eradication of slavery as necessary. These passionate, reform-minded individuals did not view the institution as merely a political issue, but rather as a central, undeniable moral imperative of the Holy Christian Gospel. As Northern New School spokesmen grew bolder in their anti-slavery pronouncements, they deeply scandalized Southern clergy and congregations, creating a massive, irreparable rift between the regional factions. In many Southern eyes, these controversial pronouncements were not merely offensive, they represented a dangerous politicization of the pulpit that violated the traditional boundaries of established ecclesiastical authority. While conservative old-school Presbyterians across the nation harbored deep misgivings about the New School's theological innovations, the Southern constituency felt uniquely and directly threatened by the rhetoric. This aggressive, highly volatile anti-slavery rhetoric emanating from New School assemblies caused widespread panic, severely damaging any remaining institutional goodwill between the northern and southern wings of the denomination. One contemporary observer captured the rising anxiety across the region by noting in writing, "It looks as if the Presbyterian Church were becoming an abolition society." This intense polarization triggered a series of regional withdrawals and structural realignments, forever altering the ecclesiastical landscape and breaking historical bonds between the northern and southern churches. By severing ties with Northern-dominated national organizations, Southern Presbyterians sought to insulate themselves from what they viewed as dangerous theological novelties, abolitionist agitation, and hostile Northern perspectives. They explicitly sought to escape the distinct anti-Southern outlook of wealthy voluntary organizations like the American Home Missionary Society, which they believed undermined their traditional regional way of life. Left entirely to cultivate its own institutional identity away from Northern influence, Southern Presbyterianism rapidly developed an increasingly conservative caste that came to dominate its theology and culture. Southern theologians vigorously defended local social hierarchies as divinely sanctioned and intentionally aligned their covenant theology with Southern cultural traditions, resisting any outside interference from Northern abolitionists. These regional leaders argued forcefully that the Christian church had absolutely no biblical mandate to interfere with established civil institutions, firmly cementing their pro-slavery theological stance. Ultimately, the 1837 to 1838 schism created an ecclesiastical landscape containing two parallel Presbyterian denominations, both of which were continuously battered by intense regional and theological crosscurrents. The original division between the old and new schools endured for 32 long years, acting as a direct structural precursor to the literal, violent fracturing of the nation. The Northern New School officially repudiated its Southern brethren over the issue of slavery in 1857, directly leading to the immediate formation of the United Synod of the South. 4 years later, the Southern Old School formally seceded at the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, completing the total sectional alignment of American Presbyterianism. Despite the severe institutional disruption of the 1838 schism, both the Old School and New School factions demonstrated remarkable vitality during their 3 decades of separation. Rather than entering a period of decline or stagnation, both groups aggressively expanded their educational footprints and mobilized extensive missionary networks to keep pace with a rapidly growing nation. The competitive dynamic between the two schools sparked a race to establish permanent institutions of higher learning, as each side sought to validate its theological vision. This aggressive institutional race was driven by a shared, vital desire to secure a steady, reliable supply of ordained ministers to serve their rapidly expanding regional congregations. This educational infrastructure built upon a foundation laid in the decades prior to the split. The Presbyterian tradition had already established Princeton Seminary in the year 1812. This vital, expanding educational network had also established Union Seminary in Virginia, alongside the historic founding of Auburn Seminary in upstate New York in 1816. This network had expanded rapidly with the creation of Western Theological Seminary at Allegheny City and Lane Theological Seminary in Cincinnati during the late 1820s. This rapid institutional growth continued with the strategic establishment of Columbia and Danville seminaries in 1828, expanding the church's reach deep into the southern states. This impressive national expansion culminated in the founding of Union Theological Seminary in New York in 1836, just prior to the Great Division of the Church. Following the schism, these institutions became intellectual battlegrounds, refining the distinct polemics of old school confessionalism and new school revivalism while fueling westward expansion. During their 32 years of separate existence, the two denominations sent out an astonishing wave of thousands of missionaries to the American frontier and foreign fields. This massive mobilization forced the new school to gradually reconsider its historic, long-standing reliance on independent, interdenominational voluntary societies to manage its missionary operations. Originally, the new school championed cooperative agencies like the American Home Missionary Society, viewing them as expressions of a broad, ecumenical Christian kingdom. They likewise supported the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, believing that cooperative, interdenominational efforts were the most effective way to spread the gospel. However, practical realities on the frontier soon exposed the limits of this cooperative approach, presenting severe administrative challenges that the new school could no longer ignore. Over time, the new school realized that relying on interdenominational agencies made it incredibly difficult to cultivate distinct denominational loyalty or protect its own financial resources. They also discovered that this method made it difficult to plant explicitly Presbyterian churches, as resources raised by Presbyterians frequently funded Congregationalist works. Consequently, the new school began developing its own denominational committees and permanent church boards to directly manage their growing networks. By centralizing its missionary operations, the new school brought its institutional practice into direct functional alignment with the old school's established ecclesiastical model. This structural convergence removed one of the primary practical barriers to their eventual reconciliation, making organic reunion far less complicated by the decade of the 1860s. In the North, the shared trauma of a fractured nation fostered an unprecedented spirit of unity among the remaining Old School and New School Presbyterian factions. Extensive participation in patriotic support for the Union brought ministers, chaplains, and dedicated laypeople into daily harmonious cooperation on the bloody battlefields and in makeshift hospitals. Furthermore, decades of separate, independent existence had quietly softened old animosities and mutual suspicions that had plagued the two groups since the original division. The new school had fully vindicated its commitment to orderly Presbyterian polity by successfully establishing and operating its own highly efficient denominational church boards. Concurrently, the old school grew to deeply appreciate the vibrant evangelistic zeal displayed by their northern peers, recognizing that their goals for national expansion were virtually identical. The final, seemingly insurmountable theological barrier fell when conservative old school leaders formally revisited the historic Auburn Declaration, which was originally drafted to defend against heresy. Upon careful, deliberate re-examination, the Old School General Assembly concluded that the controversial declaration actually fell safely within the legitimate historical boundaries of moderate Reformed orthodoxy. This crucial intellectual breakthrough assured the Old School that their northern brethren held a deep, unyielding respect for traditional Calvinist principles and standard confessional integrity. This verification allowed both organizations to confidently share historical theological works, solidifying their shared commitment to the deep intellectual foundations of the broader Reformed tradition. Convinced that the new school was genuinely and firmly committed to the Westminster standards, the two northern bodies moved rapidly toward finalizing a formal permanent union. In the year 1870, delegates from both denominations gathered in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to officially finalize a historic, monumental merger of the two bodies. This monumental, long-awaited national reunion brought a definitive official end to over 30 long years of bitter institutional division and intense regional rancor. It successfully forged a consolidated, structurally robust Northern church equipped to confront the vast urban and industrial challenges that characterized the late 19th century. Meanwhile, the Southern Presbyterian Church remained a fiercely independent, culturally distinct regional entity, refusing to participate in the Northern reunion for many generations to come. The fracture of 1838 reminds us that the theological walls we build are often cemented by the deep, unspoken cultural anxieties of our time. When we look back at the bitter divide between the old and new schools, we are forced to confront the delicate balance between preserving historical truth and adapting. It challenges us to consider whether our current ecclesiastical boundaries are truly guarding structural purity or simply resisting the necessary growth required to reach a changing world. Are the theological lines you draw today born out of timeless, unyielding conviction, or are they merely temporary reactions to the shifting cultural winds of our time? If the church must always be reforming, how do we successfully distinguish between an innovative preservation of the faith and a genuine compromise of the gospel? Join us next week as we continue to look at the branches of the Presbyterian tree when we dive deep into the Free Presbyterian Church of 1847. We will explore how a new wave of intense conviction split the church once again, forever altering the landscape of faith, freedom, and American ecclesiastical history. Do not miss this next exciting chapter in our ongoing deep dive journey through the fascinating history of the American church. If you want to keep unpacking the deep history, complex theology, and fascinating stories that shaped our modern world, make sure to subscribe to Theology today. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the powerful theological ideas that change the course of human history.